Good morning. I'm Manish Shah from Stanford University, and I'd like to also introduce my co-presenters, Dr. Henry Wang from The Ohio State University and Shannon Stevens from University of Alabama at Birmingham. And thank you for coming to Trailblazing Solutions, Community Consultation Strategies for Exception from Informed Consent. There are several things that we would like to accomplish today during this session. One is to articulate effective community consultation strategies for exception from informed consent studies of life-threatening emergencies, including those that involve children. And specifically, I'm going to talk about my experience with the pediatric dose optimization for seizures in EMS study, or PD-dose, and Dr. Wang is going to talk about, he's the principal investigator for the pediatric pre-hospital airway resuscitation trial, and Mr. Stevens, he's also going to discuss several trials that he's been involved in with community consultation through his work at the University of Alabama. And through that, we would like to have you be able to devise an approach to community consultation and public disclosure plan for studies that you may be thinking about that may need to use exception from informed consent, and then also be able to differentiate advantages and disadvantages of several strategies that we're going to discuss in a more traditional model and a more innovative model when planning community consultation and public disclosure. So our disclosures are here. So I thought it'd be important to just start with an overview and history of exception from informed consent, a very brief history though. But first, I think it's also important, since we will be talking about two pediatric-focused EMS studies, to mention some of the hurdles that exist in doing this type of research. But some of these things that I'm going to mention are also relevant to hospital-based emergency department research that involves exception from informed consent. So there are numerous hurdles to conducting research using exception from informed consent. And specifically with children, relative to adult studies, pediatric studies involve a vulnerable population, and they also tend to be lower quality in design and focus less on treatment effectiveness. In addition, institutional review boards, the chairs of them, judge certain types of research procedures as being too risky for children relative to adults. And then layered on top of these barriers that exist, specifically in the EMS setting, in the pre-hospital setting, there are challenges related to funding, ethical approval for research, randomizing interventions, and then just the complexity of the logistics of partnering with EMS agencies to conduct research. So recognizing these hurdles, back in 1996, the Food and Drug Administration established a regulation known as 21 CFR 50.24, and in that, it guides the conduct of emergency research and permits an exception from informed consent if 8 criteria are met. So the first is that it needs to involve, the research needs to involve a life-threatening condition for which available treatments are unsatisfactory. Data collection must be necessary to determine safety and effectiveness, and obtaining informed consent is not feasible. That intervention must be administered before consent can be obtained, and there is no reasonable way to identify prospectively in advance individuals for participation. The participation has the prospect of direct benefit to the subjects, and the investigation could not be carried out without the waiver. So there are numerous criteria that must be met, and it's not just one of these. All 8 need to be met in order to qualify as an exception from informed consent study. So there has been some data that has been published on the status of exception from informed consent trials. There was a publication 3 years ago that notes that there have been 110 trials at that point that were either completed or were currently recruiting at the time, were abandoned, or were in the planning stage. Of those, approximately 1/3 were EMS studies, and 10% involved children. So the EFIC guidance that the FDA has issued requires that investigators actively seek community feedback before study approval. And it's for several reasons. One is to inform the community about the study in advance. The second thing is to be able to convey the community's input back to the IRB in order to help inform them when making a decision. And then the third thing is to identify potential community level concerns that ideally could be addressed prior to final IRB approval. So investigators have flexibility about how to conduct this community consultation, and during our presentation we'll talk about different approaches that we've taken in several studies. And many studies in the past have relied on things like town hall meetings, press releases, posting surveys on websites, and using random digit dialing, with most recent efforts integrating the use of social media. So I'm going to give you an example of what we did for the PD dose trial, and I would say that this is more of a traditional approach. However, we did, I think, use some more updated methods compared to what has been done decades ago. So for this study, this is a study that's being conducted in EMS agencies in 20 different cities across the country through the Pediatric Emergency Care Applied Research Network. And it's a study that is looking at age-based midazolam dosing for pediatric status epilepticus in the field. And the study is funded by the National Institute of Neurological Disorders and Stroke. And was, because this qualified as an EFIC study, we're using a medication that's already approved for the treatment of status epilepticus. We still had to get an investigational new drug clearance from the FDA because it is an EFIC study. So what did we do? So we required several things of each site. So what we did centrally for the study was we gave all the sites a template of what is required and what is optional. And so there were several things that we made required from the community consultation point of view. So one was we wanted to make sure that there was direct interaction with the community. And so we did this through requiring each site to have at least 100 online surveys of patients or families, and these were accessed through a QR code that was placed on a poster in either emergency departments, neurology clinics, or other locations like general pediatricians' offices in the community. That online survey, at the end of the survey, there was an option to volunteer to be contacted if you wanted to participate in a more in-depth semi-structured interview. And so we required each site to have 10 semi-structured interviews. And for each of these things, we had these available in both English and Spanish. The second thing, in terms of big categories, is public solicitation of feedback. And so we did this centrally as well by creating handouts, posters that had this QR code that would route to the website and the survey. We had a study website that explained the study in lay terms. And then we also created sample language that we distributed to all the sites that they could use as an email template to email out to the medical community, either emergency departments, neurologists, critical care, or general pediatrics offices, and then also similar email crafted towards EMS medical directors and EMS clinicians. So this is just a picture on the left of what that poster looked like, or one of the posters with the QR code at the bottom, and then we tailored it to that in the bottom left. The site principal investigator could put their own specific contact information for that site. And then on the right-hand side, you can see an example of the Spanish video. So on the website, we had all the content in both English and Spanish, and I had created a 5-minute video that explains the study in lay terms in both English and in Spanish. In terms of the interactive piece as well, other things that we did, We did require at least one of these things to be done. And for these required that there was a recording and a transcript if there was a meeting done or an interview done. So for example, meetings with the community or meetings at local government, or for example, in Houston, I went to City Council to explain the study to the City Council members as one example. I met with neurologists, neurology advocacy groups, so the Epilepsy Foundation in certain states to explain the study. Interviews, discussions on talk radio. As an example, I was interviewed by the local news to talk about the study so that the public was aware, and then that was also posted on social media. And then meetings or activities provided by hospitals, so including giving grand rounds or speaking specifically at division meetings in the Division of Neurology or the Division of Critical Care to ensure that people were informed that the study was happening in advance, and to solicit feedback from them and submit that feedback to the IRB. Passive methods included targeted mailings to households, which I'll say the majority of the sites chose not to do. Advertisements or articles in media outlets, some chose to do that. Links to study information on hospital websites, most of the sites chose to do that. Summary materials in Spanish, and then some of the sites, if they identified that there was another language in their area that was highly prevalent, then they would also create the materials in that language as well. And then contacting local regional community leaders, newsletter posts, public service announcements. So these are all examples of things that we said, you can do these. These are passive methods to inform the community. Please pick at least 3. And then in post-enrollment public disclosure, what we have in our plan is that the results will be disseminated in a variety of ways. The traditional methods of, obviously, through presentation at scientific meetings like these, publication on the website, contacting all the families that have been enrolled and sending a letter to them to inform them of the results, and then through social media outlets, and then there's other methods that are listed here. So many times when we talk about how to do this, what sometimes gets left out is, well, how much does this cost? So for us, in the study, we had budgeted based on feedback we had received from other people who have done this for other studies, $8,000 per site in year 1 for that initial community consultation public disclosure process, and then $2,000 in year 5, which will be next year, to inform the community of the findings once we have the results analyzed. So, and then I think it's important to talk about how long does this take. So the community consultation start for all the 20 sites ranged over the span of about 5 or 6 months. And we needed to do this before we could get final IRB approval to actually start enrollment. So you'll see here that the start dates began December to May, and why it took a while to start is because the site needed to have all of their regulatory pieces in place. For example, FWA agreements, federal-wide assurance agreements with the EMS agency. Sometimes that was a hurdle that took a while before we could actually start the community consultation. And then once we actually got the approval to start, it took anywhere from 1 to 4 months to complete the 100 surveys, the 10 interviews, and then the other things that we made, that we gave the menu of options to the sites to do. So we experienced a delay in about 10 of the sites, and so we had to modify our stepped wedge design so that 10 of the sites shifted in terms of by several months in terms of when they were originally going to start. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to Shannon Stevens so that he can talk more about novel approaches to community consultation and public disclosure.
Thank you very much, although I would say that model that you used was very novel and probably unlike some of the traditional ways that we've done EFIC research. I've been running EFIC trials since 2001, and those of you in the room that have had experience with EFIC trials, this is 2 citations from the ROC TXA trial and the PROPER trial and the COMBAT trial. And these authors actually, for their trials, they showed that the duration to seek IRB approval for an EFIC trial was 12 to 18 months, and it cost their sites $80,000 to $100,000. So a little bit different than my colleague Dr. Shah got, but this was a reality, and this was a big barrier for sites to participate in EFIC research. And so we really struggled with that idea, and we thought, are there better ways to engage community members? And we came up with this digital, interactive, media-based approach to engage community members. Our model was really designed around social media ads, websites and online surveys, and then online community meetings. And being able to centralize all this activity and run everything from one shop, then you can consolidate all the information from that and submit it to a central IRB and then seek approval to begin a study. So the reason why we've picked each one of these areas is we think they represent different things. Social media gives you great reach in the community, but to measure engagement is a little less. I mean, it does reach a broad swath of your community, but the engagement is just less. Websites and online surveys do a really good job of providing a good balance between reach and engagement of community members. And then the last thing, the online community meetings, they reach fewer people, but the engagement with the community members is so much better. And so this approach really combines all three. So we just finished this for a 92-center EFIC trial in trauma using 4-factor PCC for patients that require a massive transfusion. So this was an industry-funded clinical trial. We coordinated all of the EFIC activities for all 92 centers from UAB, and this study used a central IRB, Advara. And I'll go through some of the results from this. And all of this was published in JAMA Surgery earlier this year. So the social media ads, we build the social media ads using two platforms, Facebook and Instagram. And Facebook, the reason why we picked those two is those two give you really good information about the providers, the target person that's going to see the ad, and they give you great feedback from the community members. So this is what the ads look like. So our team builds these ads, and this will show up on your Facebook or Instagram account, and you can target your community a couple of ways. So this was a trauma trial. So our first targeted area was a geographic target area of the catchment area for our trauma center. Where do most of the trauma patients come from? So that's one targeted approach. The second one is Meta allows you to target ads to specific zip codes. And so you can really drill down to trying to reach your true at-risk community for your trial. So this is what the ad looks like if you saw it on Facebook, and we were able to reach, and I won't go over all the summaries of these, but we were able to reach over 11 million unique individuals. They saw this ad. So that's about 7 views per person reached. We also build websites. So we would build a website for the study, and the website would include information about the clinical trial. It would include a trial summary. It would include a FAQ, information about EFIC research in general. It would include information about how to opt out, how a community member could ask for more information. This was really the hub. We tried to route community members to the website every chance we could. The website also gives you an opportunity to link to your online survey and link to a video, as Dr. Shah showed. So this was a video for Dr. Wang's PD part trial. We list the website. We actually will go in and build the website in different languages depending on the community that we're trying to reach. And the websites are a wonderful tool for engaging community members. We had over 144,000 unique visitors to those websites, or about 3,000 unique visitors per enrollment center in the network. And I would say that you'd be hard pressed to beat that in the traditional approaches of EFIC. Now it wasn't standard across the sites, but it was about 3,000 views per site. We built online surveys. So years ago we would do in-person surveys. These are online surveys using Qualtrics. And Qualtrics gives you a great opportunity to describe your study and to solicit questions. So we built survey questions around asking about willingness to participate or willingness about family members to participate in an EFIC trial. And then we built 8 demographic questions, trying to understand who was the individual that's actually completing the question. This is some of the questions that we included on the survey. we had over 17,000 people complete the survey. So almost 300 people per enrollment site completed the survey. We found that the demographics of the people completing the survey was representative of the local community. Some of the questions that we asked was, if you were severely injured and needed a blood transfusion, would you want to be enrolled in a trial? 64% of the people said yes, and I know some people kind of scratched their head at that number, but there was 21% that said, I don't know or I don't care to answer. And I think that gives us an opportunity to try to figure out how can we better explain the study and reach that population. The good thing was only 15% of the people said no. The question about, do you believe that emergency medical research is necessary or should be done in your community? Almost 90% of the people said yes, they think that EFIC research is necessary and should be done in their community. But getting back to the other question, only 64% of them said, I'm willing to participate. So I think there's some opportunities there for figuring out how we can better engage community members using the Qualtrics survey. The other component we use is video conferencing platforms like Teams or Zoom. It gives you an opportunity to provide information in small groups. Dr. Shah mentioned they did local focus groups. This would be the same way, except just using Teams or Zoom. We build a structured slide set, so this is the only thing that the local investigator is responsible for, is facilitating and running the Teams meeting. And so, and using a structured slide set to go through. And these meetings are always, they're sparsely attended, but they're attended and representative of the community members. Like Dr. Shah, we included physical flyers that could be placed in areas where your at-risk community members may live, work, or reside. We put these in our ED waiting area. We do include a QR code, and again, everything routes back to that study website. So we take all this information, and this whole process runs for 2 months. We take all that information from the social media ads to the surveys to the meetings, and we take all of that and we build the report, the IRB report that then goes back to the IRB. And for the PD part trial for Dr. Wang, this was about a 50-page report that ends up going back to the IRB, and it really summarizes all the findings of the community consultation and public disclosure process. And I'd say, Dr. Shah mentioned about traditional approaches. On the left-hand side was the old traditional way that we used to run EFIC trials with television and radio and billboard ads and newspapers and random digit dialing and town hall meetings. I think this new model, this digital interactive model, is using some of the same approaches, but we're able to reach more people in the community. We've ran several different EFIC trials through UAB. We have over 157 clinical enrollment sites. We've used 3 different central IRBs. They've all seen this process, and this process really seems to work well. We're in the process of building out this model for several more upcoming EFIC trials. So the question people always ask is like, how long does this process take? So originally we thought it would take 4 months. We thought it'd take a month to build everything and get a site started. The campaign should run for 2 months, and then we thought it would take a month on the back end to summarize the data and submit it to the IRB. So that was our original goal, was 4 months to get this through. But we wanted to try to understand what was that process actually like for the TAP trial. So we analyzed data from 62 of the TAP trial sites, and we looked at all the different milestones and benchmarks that it went through. We looked at from the start of social media campaign all the way through IRB approval. And unfortunately, we found that for that trial, the average time from the kickoff call, where we had a call with the PI and local coordinator that said, hey, tell us about your site, and how can we build these campaigns for you. From that kickoff call until IRB approval, it was about 235 days. And that range was about 116 days to, we had one site, it was 459 days. So we were a little discouraged about that. But as Dr. Shah mentioned, there was a lot of work on the front end. For Dr. Wang's trial that we ran, for the PD part trial, we got all 10 sites through that entire process in under 89 days. The range was 70 to 89 days. So I think this shows the value of using an existing network that has existing infrastructure, existing contracts in place. It really speaks to the importance of using networks like the PCAR network and the Siren network, the Lights network. We wondered if sites with EFIC experience could get through this process quicker than sites that had never done EFIC before. 20 years ago, there was only about 20 sites in the U.S. that actually had experience with EFIC. So you always wondered about, are our results generalizable? So for the TAP trial, we had so many sites, we wondered, could sites with EFIC experience get through this process just as quick? So these violin plots show the bimodal distribution of all the activities for the sites to get through the EFIC process. And those on the left are the sites with no EFIC experience, and those on the right have EFIC experience. So of the 62 sites, 61% had a prior experience, and 39 did not. So the median time to start the social media campaigns was almost identical. The median time to submit the report to the IRB was 196 days for sites with no experience, 204 days for sites with experience. As you see, there's hardly any difference between the two groups. So, again, we look at this and we see this as positive, that sites and investigators with no experience in EFIC using this model can get through that process as at the same speed and rate and gain approval as sites that have decades worth of experience. I'll turn it over now to my colleague, Dr. Wang, to talk about questions about community consultation and public disclosure.
Thanks, Shannon and Manish. So I'm going to talk about some very important questions about the CCPD process. Okay. An important question with all of these activities is whether the samples obtained from these community consultation activities accurately represent the communities that we are targeting for the research trial. The results of all EFIC CCPD activities are posted with the FDA in their, quote, docket. This is a public repository of information. In this particular study, Feldman and colleagues examined all of the CCPD surveys posted in the docket results for all EFIC trials between 1996 and 2017. This immense effort involved 16,000 pages of materials from 27 EFIC trials. An important observation was that the surveys, both those obtained in a random fashion as well as those done by convenience surveying, tended to include more female respondents, and they also tended to underrepresent minority populations. And so this is an important reminder that your method of reaching out to community may not necessarily get the population that you're aiming for. So these are some data that from our efforts in the PD-PAR trial. Qualtrics has panels of community members spread out throughout the United States, specifically for marketing purposes. And in the PD-PAR trial, we utilized this marketing survey platform to elicit community consultation survey responses. And Qualtrics does this in a very precise way, so I can say, give me a sample that represents the population for that community. Over the span of 2 to 3 weeks across the 10 sites in our trial, our system sent out 16,000 invitations and yielded about 6,600 surveys. So Alex Keister from our team presented earlier in this week's conference in a comparison of the demographics of the survey respondents against the characteristics of the people who live in those cities. He compared the survey demographics against data from the US Census. These bar graphs depicted differences between those two populations. The upward bars suggest that the survey overrepresented that population, and the downward pointing bars suggested that representation was higher in the census data. And you'll see that for these key metrics, there are small but important differences in the representation between the survey respondents and those members of the community. This type of analysis becomes really interesting when you stratify by individual sites. So this is an example of the differences between the survey respondents' race and the race of the community members in each of the 10 sites of the trial. And again, while it's great to have a unified survey reaching out across the whole network, there are some subtle but very important differences. A related question is whether the characteristics of the CCPD survey respondents reflect the characteristics of the people actually enrolled in the trial. So these are data from Dr. Shah's PD dose trial. Okay? And he compared the demographics of survey respondents and interview respondents with those of the individuals enrolled in the trial. And you'll see that there are some key differences. Compared with those enrolled subjects, the survey respondents tended to be more likely to be white, and they were a lot more likely to be non-Hispanic. An important question that every research team wrangles with is, what does the IRB actually want from this process? And it turns out standards for community consultation and approval are not clearly defined. These are results from the Voices 3 study. They interviewed IRB directors from 11 IRBs across the nation, and they talked about the process of community consultation and public disclosure. And there are many important themes that emerge from this study. First of all, assessment of community consultation plans are based largely by Gestalt. They're driven a lot by historic experience. They often rely upon the experience of the investigators proposing these studies. There are no magic minimum numbers for community consultation activities or approval. And the assessment of community approval is, again, largely a Gestalt process. There is also clear recognition that every study is different. One size does not fit all with community consultation and public disclosure. There isn't even a standard definition of a community. Assessment of the CCPD process, again, is largely driven by our gut feeling, Gestalt, or experience. Finally, I'm going to talk about $1 million question. How much does this all cost? Dr. Shah and Mr. Stevens provided some insights here. Here's what I thought a lot about this in preparing for today's presentation. This has not been published, but we think that this is the way I think about the community consultation process. On the left, you see many classic community consultation activities. And we rated these according to their reach. How far do they reach into the community? How big is the fishing net? Secondly, what is the depth of engagement? When you do reach an individual, how much time do you spend with them? How much meaningful information do you get from that individual encounter? And lastly, how hard does your research team need to spin their wheels to accomplish each of these activities? And you'll see that each of these community consultation activities has a different dimension of reach, depth, and effort or cost. So for example, using social media is relatively easy to deploy. It costs very little money. It's easy to deploy this technique. But it reaches a massive population. You can get millions of individuals seeing your ads. There is a little bit of engagement because in social media, respondents can respond, give an impression or a reaction to the information you're providing. In the past, we were asked to do radio, TV ads, and email advertisements. This type of activity reaches a lot of persons, but it it offers virtually no engagement depth. There's no feedback from that type of activity, and it's extraordinarily expensive. A site can spend $20,000 on radio, TV, and mail ads. The marketing surveys, the Qualtrics system I described before, is a nice mix, a balance between the two. There is a substantial investment, but you get pretty significant reach and some nice engagement, a lot of meaningful information. Moving on, surveys can be distributed in two different ways. You can do random digit dialing, or you can use, you can also use manual surveys. These are other ways of distributing surveys. And again, these reach fewer individuals, but there's a good return on the investment. These can be very expensive. It might seem convenient to send your research assistant to the waiting room to hand out surveys to individuals. It takes an extraordinary amount of time for your research team to sit there and engage individuals to do something as simple as complete a survey. And lastly, virtual platforms, Zoom, Teams, have transformed how we can conduct meetings and interviews. We like community meetings because we get to gather a lot of people and get a lot of their feedback. But organizing a meeting can take significant effort on the part of research teams. It might seem simple to get 10 people to gather around the fire, but it can take hours to actually organize that event. Being able to use a virtual platform makes this much easier. And furthermore, what you heard from Shannon's presentation earlier, by using a virtual platform, now you can have one facilitator cover meetings across the entire country. Now there's consistency in how those meetings are carried out. In the past, each of 10 sites would do their own thing facilitating meetings, and you would get a different flavor of engagement and interaction in those activities. How much does this all cost? As Shannon mentioned before, 10 years ago, we would plan to spend $50,000 to $100,000 per site to carry this all out. Today, the cost is much lower. It's possible to do this for $10,000 to $20,000 per site. So in conclusion, we've provided for you today an oversight of some of the classic approaches to community consultation and public disclosure. We've even used an overview of some of the more innovative digital approaches, which we think will transform this field. Emergency care research is so important to our field of emergency medicine. And the ability to carry out randomized clinical trials on individuals who cannot give consent is a very important part of our methodology. And it's important that we continue to innovate how we carry out exception-informed consent so we can continue our goal of advancing our understanding of emergency care. Okay, thank you very much. And we have lots of time for questions and answers. It's a small group today. I would hope that this is more of an interactive discussion and not so much formal questions and answers.
Yeah, I wasn't surprised. So people that have done it before have their own way of doing it, their own expectations, and you're imposing a new system on them with a new way of doing it, and so they need to reconcile it. I think places that hadn't had it before were places that didn't know what the hell was going on, and you came with a package that said, here's what we're going to do, and you did it, and they were like, okay. So I think that I thought that made sense. But I was with you. I was surprised.
I'm surprised by how sites have a little bit of skepticism about these new digital tools. And they don't quite understand it. They think we're just, posting TikTok videos and little things on Instagram. But this is a new way of thinking about how you reach into and engage the community. In my view, this is transformational. This goes beyond EFIC. This is how we as scientists really reach into the community and engage with our stakeholders, the people who are going to be parts of our research.
This is also
you want to start?
Sure. I'd say for mine, I didn't have it all fleshed out yet, what the plan was going to be. So I think I probably had half a page describing that we were going to do it, how much we budgeted for it, minimum requirements of sites. So I knew at least that we were going to require surveys and interviews, but the other details of what we were going to make optional and the extent of social media and all that, we left it very minimal in terms of the description of the grant, but then flesh that out in a lot more detail when we got to the point of trying to get the initial phase of IRB approval, because we need to have the IRB approve what the plan was going to be of how we were going to go about this.
I've seen proposals that said EFIC but provided no details. That sends a message, you don't know what's involved. Okay. I think these approaches are so innovative, and from a study section perspective, really reassure that you know how to get the network through this process really quickly. And on top of that, they're always asking, how are you going to let the community know about your trial? Here's an answer. We can let millions of people know about these trials. That's a powerful statement. So my opinion, I bless in weaving these details into a grant application.
For our NIH trial, we included the full EFIC plan. We didn't get into the details of like the specific content of the webpage, but we did list the full EFIC plan as an appendices. And it would be needed later on when you submit to the FDA for your 90 days.
I think, in hindsight, like if you're going to take an innovative approach like what Shannon does and UAP for other studies, I would definitely want to describe that, because I think that demonstrates innovation in an approach, and I think that would be more favorably viewed in terms of truly trying to engage with the community.
In the back.
Question, I guess, just regarding the, obviously this is a ton of work, a ton of investment, and hard to get these studies off the ground. I'm going to read the sigh of relief when our IRB said we don't think that this trial you want to do is an EFIC trial. We think it's a waiver of informed consent for an EMS transport destination study. How much research, how much research do you think is not happening or would happen, but it's the hurdle is too high? And is there anything that you think should be modified in this process? Obviously, we want to do ethical research. We want to have the right informed consent. I think there's some trials where it's obvious that this needs to have a big community consent process. And I think other times when we can't get the study done because of funding and things to make this happen, we just change. I mean, in the EMS world, we just change the protocol and then see what happens in 2 years. And I think that's probably not the right way to do it either. And so I'm just curious your experience as experts who have gone through this a lot, where you think that right balance is.
In EMS, we definitely struggle with the ethics of implementing new practices. This is finally showing up on the radar screen and probably a point of discussion within our EMS circles. At what point is this pushing this standard of care? At what point is this experimentation? And I don't think we have a clear answer. An important differentiation in the human subjects protection is EFIC is not the same as waiver of informed consent. These are two completely different bars. Whenever possible, try to do waiver of informed consent. However, in 2025, 26, we still have this awareness that communities are interested in the research. They want to know about the research. And I can tell you as an investigator, even if I do a study under waiver, if it's multi-center and across a large network, I still have to let the community know. I have an ethical obligation to know. I need to let the people know that we did this study somehow. Well, those are the same tools we use for EFIC. There's now a blurrier line between the two. I don't know what the right approach is. I just know that we have challenges with both approaches.
And I think that we always want to uphold ethics in the research that we do, and I think part of that, and this is something that we heard from the community, is people want autonomy in decision making, right? So if you are we could have gone, well, in theory, we could have gone the route of saying, okay, well, we're just changing your protocol, because that's what we're doing, we're changing your protocol, and we're staggering when we change it among these 20 sites, and we could say, okay, well, we're going to compare before and after, but we're doing it prospectively. So if we're doing it prospectively from an ethical point of view, I think it's necessary to inform patients or their families right away that we have done this. And so then the question is, well, it would be impossible to do that in the moment. And this was actually a struggle to have even the FDA understand this, because and this was my first time doing a EFIC trial, so they had asked me, what is the therapeutic window? So what is the time frame within which you must deliver this intervention? And I think in hindsight, I made the mistake of saying 5 minutes, because, and Robert's laughing, you probably should have said 0. And because once you open that door of saying, okay, you have 5 minutes to treat this, then the guidelines say, well, then during that window, you have to attempt to inform the patient or their family about what you're doing from a research point of view. And I tried to walk it back, and I was not successful. So I think it's a challenge. I try to explain. EMS arrives on scene. They have to make sure the scene's safe. They have to assess airway, breathing, circulation. They can't do this even though they have 5 minutes, and that's what they're doing during that 5-minute period. They can't have this conversation, and it was quite a challenge. So I think, but there's still I think an obligation of duty as investigators that at the earliest feasible opportunity to inform people, we have enrolled you in a study and we want to use your data. Is that okay? And if they say no, then we can't use their data anymore.
Yeah, that makes great points.
I think, go ahead. Yeah.
I was just going to add, so I'm sure part of the community consultation process is the folks can actually opt out of the study in advance, especially with great hospital studies. Give me your thoughts on like what are good, efficient ways of communicating that to, especially a responding EMS clinician, or something like that.
Well, so we actually had this had to deal with this with this trial. You can't opt out of this study in advance because it's a protocol change. So there's only one protocol. We had explained this to the FDA as well. There's only one protocol, and so once you change the protocol, you can't opt for another protocol. So we had to explain why. Really, that's not a meaningful choice. And then 2, we can't really identify these patients in advance to keep and have an opt-out list. So yes, we can notify all the kids, all the neurologists that treat kids that have seizures, but it's not like the chance that they're actually going to take an ambulance for their seizure might be low because there's a high incidence of new onset seizures, febrile seizures that are in our study, and that's what we can also inquire for. So we think that it's hard to meaningfully have an opt-out list, and so that is not a requirement, but you do need to have the ability to explain the study in advance to people and to give them a meaningful choice after you've notified them of what is allowed with their data.
In the past, we used to give out opt-out bracelets. I wonder how many of those bracelets actually resulted in an opt-out. And our recent experience, I think IRBs get it, that that's just not practical. That doesn't work. They don't make bracelets in infant sizes, for example. Right.
Did you use that for?
So, yeah, I mean, so we did, and
Yeah.
for ESET,
Yeah.
we had child size and big kid size and adult size. I mean, I think there's the key points are the ones you made, right? It's not a required part of the regulation. Realistically, it's not something that happens. So, thousands of enrollments. For many years, we had nobody who ever came in with bracelets excluded from the study. I And then I think we had one site that had one person come with a bracelet. And get excluded. It's really, the purpose of an opt-out isn't really to get people to opt out. It's really that if one person, it's a way to listen to that one person who learned about your study, doesn't want to be in it, and wants to have some method of telling you. I mean, the chances of that person actually getting the illness of thing and coming to the study is low, but it gives them something to do. The other thing about bracelets that we learned was that some people just want a bracelet. They actually don't want to opt out of the study, they just want a free bracelet. So we actually made, I do want to be enrolled bracelets for, as well as I don't want to be enrolled bracelets. And they say, you want a bracelet, you want a blue one or a red one? Oh, blue, you know. So,
Well, one thing we did do though is once somebody was enrolled, sometimes, once somebody was notified, sometimes they said, I don't want to do your study ever. So we put them on a list so that our research staff, because some children that have chronic epilepsy, they have potentially get enrolled multiple times. And so we have tried to not agitate them by having them on a list that they for the first time to ensure that we're being mindful and respectful of that decision.
I've been impressed by how IRBs are very progressive when looking at your overall results and knowing that you're doing an EFIC trial. Trials we've run in the past, we've had some angry community members, angry family members wondering why their relatives were included in the trial, and the IRB accepted that information, but also recognized these were isolated reports relative to the massive amount of information we already collected. Over here.
Last question.
Yeah.
For that list, that do not approach list, what data did you collect, and did the IRB give you a problem collecting that data when you didn't want to be in the study?
Say it again, I couldn't hear the last one. What data did we collect?
Yeah, and did the IRB give you any issues for collecting data on patients that don't want to be in the study?
Oh, I see. So with you're supposed to keep the data that you collected up to the point of notification, because it would actually be if you don't know who withdrew, potentially it could be biased that the people that are withdrawing are different than the people who are staying in. So you should at least keep that, we're supposed to keep that. But in terms of moving forward, if somebody said, no, I don't want to be in your study ever, or please don't approach me again, then we at least keep their name and date of birth so that
Gotcha.
then our research staff, when they are going to see, okay, I'm going to approach this patient who meets the eligibility criteria, then we don't approach and we automatically withdraw.
Gotcha.
FDA guidance is that you keep all the data up until the point of withdrawal from the study. If you don't do that, you're biasing the study and you're obscuring potential safety information.
Well, I guess
Yeah,
I was
yeah.
also thinking about studies where we do consent, and so there's not, we're enrolling you and then telling you later. But you still have the same issue. There's people who are like, no, I don't want to do research, please stop talking to me, and I want to put them on a list, but the IRB didn't give any, permission to collect that data. They're not in any study. Does that make sense?
but presumably the people who are putting themselves on that list are giving permission for themselves to be on the list. They can't really say, don't ever approach me for the study, but I'm not going to tell you who I am.
Gotcha.
Right, so they don't have to sign an IRB form, but they're giving you permission to not be approached.
But it is an advantage of, it's an advantage of having bracelets over lists, in that
Yeah.
bracelets do give you an opportunity to say, I don't want to be on your list and I don't want to be in the study. Okay, here, wear this. They won't, probably, but at least it answers that question.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Lists are a problem for other reasons too, because in the emergency setting, you can't,
Yeah.
approach somebody in an EMS setting and have somebody, quick, check this list, and their names, people have common names, and, you're checking driver's license, numbers, you're excluding some people because they have a name similar to somebody who didn't want to be on the list, and you don't always find people. So lists are really hard operation.
Yeah, for trauma trials, we may not know their name
Right.
for an hour, and so the intervention and the therapeutic window of these I see way more problems
Thank you very much.
We're happy to chat outside. Thank you.